September 3rd, 1944. A smouldering field outside Saint-Vith, Belgium. On the western edge of what would become known as the Ardennes Offensive, a small contingent of German Panzer commanders stood in stunned silence around the carcass of what had once been their pride, a Panzer V Panther tank. The shot had penetrated directly through the upper glacis plate, a section of armor previously considered impenetrable to American tank fire. The commander, Major Klaus Brenner, knelt beside the jagged hole, his fingers tracing the clean edges where American tungsten-core ammunition had sliced through German steel like a surgical blade. In that moment, as ash and diesel fumes filled the air, the myth of German technological superiority died as surely as the tank crew inside. This was not an isolated incident. Across the Western Front, German tank commanders were confronting a shocking reality that contradicted everything they had been told about American armor capabilities. The Sherman tank, which they had mockingly nicknamed Tommy Cooker and Ronson for its tendency to burst into flames when hit, was now killing their most advanced tanks from frontal positions, something German tank doctrine had deemed impossible. The source of this sudden shift wasn't a new tank design, but something seemingly minor. A tungsten-cored 76mm HVAP round that German intelligence had dismissed as experimental and impractical. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Major Klaus Brenner had been a tank commander since 1941, fighting in the great armoured battles of the Eastern Front before being transferred west to counter the Allied invasion of Normandy. His personal record included 17 confirmed tank kills, most of them Soviet T-34 seconds, but also including 3 British Cromwells and 2 American Shermans. When assigned to the Western Front, he had approached the battlefield with supreme confidence, believing German armour and tactics to be vastly superior to anything the Americans could field. Sitting across from Brenner in the Tactical Command Center was Colonel Wilhelm Sternbach, head of Panzer Technical Intelligence for the Western Theater. Both men had reached their positions through demonstrated battlefield excellence and technical expertise. Both had spent years studying enemy armor capabilities with professional precision, and both were now staring at penetration reports that represented something far more devastating than a single battlefield defeat. Between them lay a stack of papers that appeared unremarkable standard after-action reports from recent engagements along the Allied advance through Belgium. The forms were bureaucratic, mundane even, filled with columns of numbers recording penetration distances, impact angles, and armor failures. Nothing about their appearance suggested they contained information that would prove the technological assumption underlying German armor supremacy was fatally flawed. Yet the numbers they contained represented a battlefield reality so unsettling that both officers had spent the previous week cross-referencing sources, examining damaged tanks, and searching desperately for errors that would make the figures less apocalyptic. Sternbach's hands trembled slightly as he pushed the top document across the desk. It was a simple damage assessment from 3 destroyed Panthers near Arlon, where Kampfgruppe Piper had engaged elements of the American 2nd Armored Division 4 days earlier. The form was stamped, dated, signed by multiple technical officers, clearly authentic. Brenner studied the figures in silence, his face growing pale as he absorbed their implications. The Americans were penetrating Panther frontal armor with standardized ammunition at combat ranges of 800 meters. He looked up at Sternbach, searching his colleague's face for some indication this was error or deception. Sternbach's expression offered no comfort. He had already worked through the same calculations, examined the same wrecked Panthers, and spent 3 sleepless nights hoping he was wrong. "This cannot be accurate," Brenner said quietly, though his tone carried no conviction. He was not stating a belief, but expressing a wish, the desperate hope that reality might somehow be less terrible than the evidence suggested. Sternbach pulled another document from the stack. "I thought the same. This is a metallurgical analysis of a recovered HVAP round from the Blyelf engagement. The Americans are using tungsten carbide penetrators inside saboted casings. The density is allowing them to achieve velocities we didn't think possible from their 76mm gun." He paused, letting the information settle. I compared this to our own armor tests. Even with our most optimistic calculations, a Panther's frontal armor should only be vulnerable to their 76mm guns at ranges under 300 meters. Yet they're achieving penetration at 800 meters, sometimes more. The two men had spent the past week engaged in exactly this kind of comparison, cross-referencing recovered American ammunition with German armor specifications, prisoner interrogations with damaged vehicle examinations, intelligence reports with battlefield results. Every source confirmed the same impossible truth. The American 76mm gun, when firing HVAP ammunition, was not just occasionally lucky against German armor. It was systematically defeating it at combat ranges previously considered safe. This advantage was not marginal or situational. It was consistent, replicable, and spreading across the battlefield as more HVAP ammunition reached American units. The implications for German armored doctrine, which relied heavily on frontal armor superiority to compensate for numerical disadvantages, were catastrophic. The journey to this moment of terrible clarity had begun months earlier, but its roots stretched back to years into fundamental miscalculations about American technical capabilities. The German armored forces had tracked Allied tank development since before the war, compiling reports on armor thickness, gun penetration, and mechanical reliability. But they had consistently, catastrophically underestimated what American industry could achieve when focused on solving specific technical problems. This was not mere incompetence. The assumptions built into German tank design, shaped by their own combat experience and engineering philosophy, made the American technical evolution seem impossible, even fantastical. Germany's own tank development colored everything they believed about armor warfare. By 1944, the Reich had developed the most advanced tanks in the world, with the Panther and Tiger representing the pinnacle of armored warfare technology. German tanks featured sloped armor of unprecedented thickness, high-velocity guns capable of destroying any Allied tank at extreme ranges, and optical sights that allowed for precise long-distance gunnery. Germany was producing tanks that seemed vastly superior to anything the Allies fielded. The Panther's frontal armor was 80mm thick and sloped at 55 degrees, making its effective thickness over 140mm. Its 75mm Quabt K-42 gun could penetrate 124mm of armor at 1,000 meters, sufficient to destroy any Allied tank at combat ranges while remaining immune to return fire from the front. The fundamental German miscalculation began before the first Sherman even reached Europe. In early 1942, American ordnance officers recognized that the standard 75mm gun mounted on early Shermans would be inadequate against future German armor. They began developing a higher velocity 76mm gun, as well as specialized armor-piercing ammunition. These developments were transmitted to Berlin through multiple intelligence channels. When presented to Hitler and his advisors, the German leadership's response was dismissive, even contemptuous. The new gun was only marginally more powerful than the existing 75mm, they concluded, and the specialized ammunition was deemed experimental, difficult to mass produce, and unlikely to be fielded in significant numbers. The assessment seemed entirely reasonable based on available data. In 1942, American tank gun development had produced relatively modest improvements in penetration capabilities. American tanks were designed for infantry support and exploitation, not tank versus tank combat. American doctrine emphasized using tank destroyers, not tanks, for anti-tank warfare. How could a nation so committed to the concept of medium tanks suddenly develop ammunition capable of defeating Germany's most advanced armor? It violated every principle of armored warfare that German experience had established. Developing effective anti-tank ammunition required specialized metallurgy. Manufacturing tungsten carbide penetrators demanded precise machining and materials that were in short supply even in Germany, which had pioneered such technology. Reich Minister Albert Speer, responsible for armament and war production, reportedly laughed when he heard about American HVAP development. The Americans are trying to compensate for poor design with material science they don't possess, he allegedly stated. Their industrial approach to warfare cannot overcome the fundamental laws of physics. Whether the exact quote is accurate, the sentiment it captured was certainly real. German leadership genuinely believed American tanks and ammunition were inherently inferior by design, not just by current implementation. This assessment seemed supported by observable facts. Early Sherman tanks were outclassed by Panthers and Tigers in every engagement. Their 75mm guns struggled to penetrate even the side armor of Panthers at combat ranges. The Germans failed to understand something fundamental about American technical development that would prove decisive. While German engineering focused on creating the ultimate expression of a weapon system, the perfect tank with the most armor and most powerful gun, American engineering focused on incremental improvements that could be rapidly deployed to existing platforms. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. German tank development required completely new models to incorporate improvements. Each new tank, Panzer III to Panzer IV to Panther to Tiger to King Tiger, represented years of development, retooling of factories, retraining of crews, and complete logistical overhauls. American tank development, by contrast, focused on standardizing the Sherman platform while continuously improving its components. When the 76mm gun proved inadequate against Panther frontal armor with standard ammunition, American ordnance didn't design an entirely new tank, they developed better ammunition. The HVAP high-velocity armor-piercing round used a tungsten carbide core inside a lightweight aluminum body to achieve higher velocities and greater penetration from the same gun. This approach, improving ammunition rather than replacing tanks, allowed for rapid deployment of enhanced capability across the entire armored force. A Sherman equipped with HVAP ammunition could be transformed from vulnerable to lethal against German armor in a single supply delivery, without requiring factory modifications, crew retraining, or logistical restructuring. The German intelligence services, particularly Panzer Technical Intelligence under Colonel Sternbach, had the institutional responsibility for tracking Allied armor capabilities. Sternbach came from traditional Prussian military lineage, embodying the professional German officer class, methodical, detail-oriented, committed to objective analysis. His organization collected information from multiple sources, including battlefield reports, technical examinations of captured equipment, systematic interrogation of captured crews, and documents captured during military operations. Throughout early 1944, as American forces began receiving 76mm equipped Shermans and limited quantities of HVAP ammunition, the intelligence picture reaching Berlin remained incomplete and confusing. Reports of American penetration capabilities varied wildly depending on source and method. Some indicated devastating effectiveness against Panther frontal armor, tanks being knocked out at ranges previously considered safe. Other reports suggested continued American struggles, with numerous 76mm rounds bouncing harmlessly off Panther glacis plates, confirming the expected German superiority. The German High Command chose to believe the more comforting assessments, the ones that aligned with their preconceptions about American inferiority. This selective acceptance of intelligence was not unique to the Germans. All military organizations tend to favor information confirming existing beliefs over data challenging core assumptions. But in Germany's case, the cost of this cognitive bias would prove catastrophic on the battlefield. After all, Germany was winning the technical arms race in 1943 and early 1944. The Panther had proven itself superior to any Allied tank in virtually every engagement. German tank crews regularly achieved kill ratios of 5-to-1 or better against American armored formations. The Wehrmacht had conquered vast territories using superior armor tactics and technology. German tanks were clearly superior to those of any opponent. German guns could destroy Allied tanks at ranges where American return fire was ineffective. German optical sights allowed for accurate first-round hits at distances American tanks couldn't even effectively target. Why should German leadership fear a nation whose tanks were consistently outclassed, whose guns were inadequate, whose armored doctrine was deemed fundamentally flawed? This comfortable certainty began developing cracks in Normandy when Sherman tanks equipped with 76mm guns and limited quantities of HVAP ammunition began appearing in American armored divisions. German commanders expected to face the same vulnerable Shermans they had been destroying with ease since North Africa. What they encountered was something else entirely. The new 76mm equipped Shermans looked nearly identical to earlier models, same chassis, same silhouette, same basic design. But their improved guns, particularly when firing HVAP rounds, were achieving penetrations against Panther frontal armor at combat ranges previously considered safe. German crews, accustomed to positioning their tanks hull down, exposing only their nearly impenetrable frontal armor, suddenly found themselves vulnerable to American fire. The tactical implications were immediate and severe. German tank doctrine relied heavily on the concept of qualitative superiority, compensating for quantitative disadvantage. A single Panther, properly positioned to present only its frontal armor, could theoretically engage multiple Shermans with near impunity, destroying them one by one while remaining immune to return fire. This fundamental assumption that German frontal armor was effectively impenetrable to American guns underpinned every aspect of German armored tactics on the Western Front. Panthers and Tigers were deployed as mobile strongpoints, anchoring defensive positions with their frontal armor toward the expected direction of attack. Tank commanders were trained to maintain frontal orientation toward enemy tanks, using their superior guns to destroy American tanks before they could close to dangerous ranges. The arrival of effective HVAP ammunition rendered this entire doctrinal approach obsolete overnight. Suddenly, there was no safe range or orientation for German heavy tanks. American Shermans could penetrate their frontal armor at standard combat distances. The qualitative advantage that had compensated for Allied numerical superiority was vanishing just as American production was flooding the battlefield with ever more tanks. Colonel General Heinz Guderian, Inspector General of Armored Troops, began receiving increasingly alarmed reports from panzer commanders throughout August and September 1944. Each panzer division engaged with American forces reported similar experiences. Panthers being knocked out through frontal armor hits, crews reporting penetrations at ranges previously considered safe, recovery teams finding clean penetration holes through glacis plates that should have been impervious to American fire. Guderian, a brilliant tactician who had pioneered modern armored warfare, understood immediately the strategic implications. If Panthers and Tigers could no longer count on frontal armor protection, the entire basis of German armored doctrine collapsed. German tank crews, outnumbered and increasingly outgunned, would face an impossible tactical situation, unable to advance due to Allied air superiority, unable to defend effectively due to frontal armor vulnerability. He urgently requested comprehensive technical assessment and battlefield testing to understand exactly what had changed in the American arsenal. This request led to Sternbach's investigation and the moment of realization that so shocked Major Brenner in the command center near Saint-Vith. The technical analysis conducted by Sternbach's team revealed the full extent of the American achievement. The HVAP round represented a perfect example of American industrial technical approach to warfare, a focused solution to a specific problem that could be rapidly deployed across existing platforms without requiring new vehicles or major modifications. The tungsten carbide penetrator was considerably denser than standard steel penetrators, allowing it to retain velocity and penetrating power over distance. The lightweight aluminum sabot reduced overall projectile weight while maintaining the critical mass where it mattered at the penetrating tip. The result was a round that achieved velocities and penetration capabilities previously thought impossible from the relatively modest 76mm gun. Sternbach's analysis of recovered HVAP rounds showed penetration capabilities approximately 40% greater than standard American armor-piercing ammunition. Where standard AP rounds could penetrate perhaps 100 mm of armor at 500 meters, HVAP could defeat 140 mm, precisely the effective thickness of a Panther's sloped frontal armor. More disturbing still, intelligence reports indicated that American production of tungsten carbide penetrators was increasing dramatically. What had begun as a limited specialized round was rapidly becoming standard issue for 76mm equipped Shermans. The metallurgical analysis of recovered rounds showed that American industry had solved the technical challenges of mass-producing tungsten carbide penetrators, something German engineers had claimed would be impossible. As Brenner studied the penetration reports spread across the table before him, the mathematical implications became inescapable. If American 76mm HVAP ammunition could defeat Panther frontal armor at 800 meters, and American production was making this ammunition widely available, then the entire calculus of armored warfare on the Western Front had fundamentally changed. The technical superiority that had allowed German tanks to fight successfully while outnumbered was evaporating. The Panther, pride of German armored forces, was no longer invulnerable from the front. The Tiger, despite its even thicker armor, would face similar challenges as more powerful American tank destroyers and specialized ammunition appeared on the battlefield. As he left the command center, Brenner was immediately struck by the sounds of approaching vehicles, not the deep rumble of German Panzers, but the distinctive higher-pitched engines of American Shermans. The American 3rd Armored Division was probing the German lines, again, testing for weaknesses in the defense network. Brenner climbed the nearby observation post, raising his binoculars to study the approaching formation. Through the powerful Zeiss optics, he could make out the distinctive silhouettes of Sherman tanks moving in textbook American formation, 5 vehicles in a rough wedge, maintaining approximately 50 meters between each tank. Nothing about their appearance suggested any significant change from the Shermans he had faced and destroyed a year earlier. The same boxy hull, the same cast turret, the same general profile. The only notable difference was the longer barrel of the 76mm gun replacing the shorter 75mm on some, but not all, of the tanks. "Still the same Tommy Cookers," muttered Captain Lutzen beside him, using the mocking nickname German tankers, had given Shermans for their tendency to catch fire when hit. "They burn just as easily as the old ones." Brenner lowered his binoculars slowly, turning to face the younger officer. "Perhaps, but they can kill you before you get your shot now. Don't underestimate them. With respect, Herr Major, I've knocked out 7 of them personally. American tanks are death traps, thin armor, high profile, gasoline engines. They're targets, not threats." Brenner handed the captain the penetration report he'd been studying earlier. This was Dieter Hoffmann's Panther last week, frontal penetration at 780 meters. Clean through the glacis plate. Tungsten-core round from a 76mm Sherman. Lutzen studied the paper, his expression shifting from confidence to confusion. "This must be a mistake. The measurements must be wrong. A 76mm can't penetrate a Panther frontally unless they're practically point blank. That's what our doctrine says. The Americans apparently haven't read our manuals." The captain handed the report back, his earlier bravado noticeably diminished. "If this is accurate, what does it mean for our tactical approach? Our entire defensive posture is built around frontal armor superiority." "It means," Brenner said quietly, "that we need to fundamentally reconsider everything we thought we knew about facing American armor. It means our qualitative edge is disappearing precisely when we can't afford to lose it." The reality Brenner was confronting had far-reaching implications beyond a single battlefield encounter. The German army's entire approach to armored warfare on the Western Front had been built around a simple principle. German tanks, while fewer in number, were technologically superior to their American counterparts. This qualitative advantage was supposed to offset the Americans' overwhelming numerical superiority. The evidence mounting on Sternbach's desk was systematically destroying this foundational assumption. The technical report on the HVAP ammunition was particularly damning. The tungsten carbide penetrator was achieving velocities that German engineers had calculated were impossible from a 76mm gun. The penetration characteristics showed a round that maintained its energy over distance in ways that standard steel penetrators could not match. The American solution was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than designing an entirely new tank with a larger gun, which would have required retooling factories, retraining crews, and developing new logistics chains, they had simply improved the ammunition for their existing platform. A Sherman with HVAP ammunition could be deployed immediately, using the same supply lines, maintenance protocols, and crew training as every other Sherman. This approach reflected a fundamental difference in engineering philosophy that German analysts had consistently underestimated. German tank design pursued theoretical perfection, the ideal balance of firepower, protection, and mobility, regardless of production complexity or logistical demands. American design prioritized standardization, reliability, and incremental improvement of existing platforms. Colonel Sternbach had organized a series of controlled tests to verify the battlefield reports. Using a captured Sherman 76mm gun and recovered HVAP rounds, his team conducted penetration tests against salvaged Panther armor plates at varying distances. The results were unequivocal. At 800 meters, HVAP rounds consistently penetrated the Panther's frontal armor, achieving full penetration with enough residual energy to cause catastrophic damage to internal components. The implications extended far beyond simple penetration statistics. The entire German armored doctrine on the Western Front had evolved around exploiting a technical advantage that was rapidly disappearing. Panzer units were being deployed as mobile strongpoints, with commanders instructed to position their tanks hull down, exposing only their nearly impenetrable frontal armor while engaging numerically superior American formations. This approach had been remarkably effective throughout 1943 and early 1944. A single well-positioned Panther could engage multiple Shermans sequentially, destroying them one by one while remaining effectively immune to return fire. Kill ratios of 5-to-1 or better were common, with German tanks only becoming vulnerable when fuel shortages or mechanical breakdowns forced abandonment, or when they were attacked from the flanks by infantry or aircraft. The appearance of effective HVAP ammunition rendered this entire tactical approach obsolete. If American Shermans could penetrate a Panther's frontal armor at standard combat ranges, there was no longer a safe position from which German tanks could engage. The mathematical equation of combat had fundamentally changed. Sternbach's analysis included projections for American HVAP production and distribution based on recovered ammunition lot numbers and prisoner interrogations. The trend was alarming. What had begun as a specialized round with limited availability was rapidly becoming standard issue. American logistics capabilities meant that within months, every Sherman with a 76mm gun would likely have access to these tungsten-core penetrators. The impact on German tank crew morale was immediate and severe. Tank commanders who had developed supreme confidence in their vehicle's frontal invulnerability suddenly found themselves vulnerable from any angle. The psychological advantage of knowing your frontal armor would protect you, which had allowed German crews to fight effectively while outnumbered, was evaporating. Major Brenner received reports from tank commanders throughout his battalion describing a new hesitancy among their crews. Gunners who had previously engaged American formations with confidence now delayed firing, concerned about exposing their position. Drivers who had skillfully positioned their tanks to present only frontal aspects now sought complete cover, reducing their fields of fire and tactical effectiveness. It's not just the physical penetration capability, Brenner explained to General Ludwig von Thoma during a staff meeting in late September. It's the psychological impact on our crews. The certainty that your frontal armor will protect you allows a commander to focus on target selection and engagement. When that certainty disappears, everything changes. Von Thoma, who had commanded tanks since the Spanish Civil War, understood immediately. The Panther was designed around frontal armor protection. Without that advantage, we're fighting American quantity with... What exactly? With training, with tactics, with crew coordination, Brenner replied. But those advantages aren't enough on their own, not against the numbers we're facing. The general nodded slowly, absently running his fingers over the Knight's Cross at his throat. Can we adapt our tactical approach? Perhaps emphasize ambush tactics rather than direct engagement? We're already implementing changes, Sternbach interjected, emphasizing engagement from covered positions, prioritizing flank shots on American tanks, reducing exposure time. But fundamentally, our entire armored doctrine was built around a technical superiority that is eroding daily. As autumn progressed, the evidence of American technical advancement accumulated like hammer blows against German strategic planning. Each new penetration report, each examination of a Panther knocked out through its frontal armor, each prisoner interrogation, confirming wider distribution of HVAP ammunition confirmed and amplified the picture of eroding German qualitative advantage. The myth of German technological superiority had been central not just to military planning, but to the narrative told to the German people. The Panther and Tiger tanks were celebrated in propaganda as examples of German engineering genius, presented as vastly superior to anything the Allies could field. Newsreels showed Panthers withstanding multiple hits while destroying enemy tanks with single precise shots. These narratives had sustained both military and civilian morale through increasingly difficult circumstances. The reality that American industry had effectively neutralized this advantage through a relatively simple ammunition improvement was devastating on multiple levels. It wasn't just a tactical problem, it was an ideological one. The belief in German technical superiority was fundamental to the Reich's self-image and propaganda narrative. Colonel General Heinz Guderian, Inspector General of Armored Troops, received Sternbach's comprehensive report in early October 1944. Guderian had been one of Germany's most brilliant tank commanders and a pioneer of modern armored warfare. He understood armored combat at a fundamental level and recognized immediately the strategic implications of the analysis. Guderian immediately requested an emergency meeting with Armaments Minister Albert Speer and representatives from the tank design bureaus. The meeting, held at the Armaments Ministry in Berlin on October 12, brought together Germany's leading tank designers, metallurgists, and production engineers. "Gentlemen," Guderian began, "the qualitative advantage our tanks have enjoyed on the Western Front is rapidly disappearing. American 76mm guns firing tungsten-core ammunition can now penetrate Panther frontal armor at combat ranges. This changes everything about how we must fight and how we must design our tanks going forward." Albert Speer, whose responsibility included all German weapons production, initially dismissed the concerns. "Our intelligence indicates tungsten shortages in America. They cannot possibly produce these specialized rounds in quantities that would significantly impact the strategic situation." Sternbach placed a box on the conference table and opened it, revealing 5 recovered HVAP rounds with different production lot numbers. These were recovered from 5 different American units across a 70-kilometer front. Production dates range from June through September 1944. The Americans have solved their production challenges. These are no longer rare specialized rounds, they are becoming standard issue. The evidence was physically present in the room, undeniable. Speer examined the rounds carefully, his expression growing more concerned as he noted the production details stamped into each casing. The lot numbers indicated mass production, not limited experimental runs. "What do you propose?" Speer finally asked. "We cannot redesign our tanks overnight. We cannot significantly increase armor thickness without sacrificing mobility or further straining our production capacity." "We need 2 parallel approaches," Guderian replied. "Immediate tactical adaptation and accelerated technical response. Our tank commanders must be informed of this new reality and trained to adapt their tactics. Simultaneously, we need improved armor composition, better angling of frontal plates, and enhanced anti-tank ammunition for our own guns." The meeting produced a series of directives that reflected the desperate nature of Germany's position. Technical modifications to Panther production would include increased slope on the lower glacis plate, elimination of the shot trap beneath the turret, and improved armor alloys where material availability permitted. Existing Panther and Tiger units would receive tactical directives emphasizing concealment, engagement from maximum range, and avoidance of frontal duels with 76mm equipped Shermans. Tank commanders were instructed to prioritize flank shots whenever possible and to operate in closer coordination with infantry anti-tank units. But the most telling aspect of the response was what wasn't said: the acknowledgement that Germany no longer possessed the industrial capacity to outproduce American armor, nor the material resources to maintain a decisive qualitative edge. The response was fundamentally reactive, attempting to adapt to an American innovation rather than leapfrogging ahead with superior German technology. This meeting marked a crucial psychological turning point among the German technical leadership. For the first time, they were explicitly acknowledging that American engineering and industrial capacity had effectively countered Germany's most advanced armor. The myth of insurmountable German technical superiority had been punctured not by a revolutionary American breakthrough, but by a practical, incremental improvement to an existing platform. The story of the HVAP penetration reached German tank crews through official channels and informal networks. Initially, many refused to believe that American 76mm guns could consistently penetrate their frontal armor. The Panther's invulnerability from the front had been an article of faith, reinforced by months of combat experience and official doctrine. "I didn't believe it until I saw it myself," recounted Sergeant Karl Becker, a Panther gunner with the 2nd SS Panzer Division. "We were in textbook position, hull down near Elsenborn. Our commander spotted 3 Shermans at approximately 900 meters. He was completely confident we had destroyed Americans from this position before with no risk to ourselves. Our first shot disabled the lead Sherman, standard procedure, but before we could acquire the second target, we took a hit directly to the upper glacis. The round penetrated completely and detonated ammunition in the forward storage. 3 of our 5 crew died instantly. The 2 of us who survived were thrown clear by the explosion. When I examined our tank afterward, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. A clean penetration through armor that was supposed to be impervious to their guns. It fundamentally changed how I viewed our technical advantage. Similar accounts accumulated throughout autumn 1944, creating a crisis of confidence among German armored forces. Tank crews who had previously engaged American formations boldly, secure in their technical superiority, now approached combat with newfound caution, sometimes hesitation. Major Brenner observed this shift directly during defensive operations near Aachen in November 1944. His Panzer battalion, previously aggressive in counterattacking American armored thrusts, now operated with noticeably more caution. Tank commanders hesitated to expose their vehicles, even when presenting only frontal aspects. Gunners took fewer shots, concerned about revealing their positions. The impact on combat effectiveness was measurable. German armored units achieved fewer kills per engagement. Counterattacks were executed with less vigor and coordination. The knowledge that American tanks could now penetrate their frontal armor had introduced uncertainty into German tactical execution, and uncertainty is fatal in armored combat. The American tankers, by contrast, demonstrated increasing confidence. Sherman crews that had previously avoided direct engagement with Panthers and Tigers, recognizing their technical disadvantage, now engaged more aggressively when equipped with 76mm guns and HVAP ammunition. The psychological advantage had shifted perceptibly. This evolving battlefield dynamic was demonstrated dramatically during the Battle of Hürtgen Forest in November 1944. A counterattack by elements of the 9th Panzer Division encountered the American 3rd Armored Division near Kleinhau. The German force, consisting of 17 Panthers and 12 Panzer IVs, had achieved surprise and held favorable terrain, a textbook scenario for German armored tactics. Under previous circumstances, this position would have allowed the German tanks to engage from hull-down positions, using their superior guns and frontal armor to destroy the American tanks methodically, while remaining largely invulnerable themselves. The expected outcome would have been a significant German tactical victory, regardless of strategic circumstances. What transpired instead revealed how fundamentally the battlefield equation had changed. The American force, consisting primarily of 76mm equipped Shermans with HVAP ammunition, engaged the German tanks frontally at ranges between 700 and 900 meters. Rather than the expected scenario of American rounds bouncing harmlessly off Panther glacis plates, the 76mm HVAP penetrators, achieved consistent frontal penetrations. The resulting engagement was catastrophic for the German force. 8 Panthers were destroyed by frontal penetrations, with 3 more damaged severely. The remaining German tanks withdrew after less than 20 minutes of combat, having destroyed only 3 American Shermans. The engagement-kill ratio, traditionally heavily favoring German armor, had inverted completely. Captain Werner Krieger, one of the few surviving Panther commanders from this engagement, later recorded his observations. "It was as if we had entered an entirely different war. Our fundamental assumptions about our technical advantage were proven false in the most brutal possible way. American tanks we had previously considered technically inferior were destroying our Panthers frontally at ranges where we had been told we were invulnerable. The psychological impact cannot be overstated. Tank combat depends on confidence. Confidence in your vehicle, your gun, your armor. When that confidence is suddenly proven misplaced, everything changes. Every tactical decision becomes questioned. Every engagement becomes hesitant." Colonel Sternbach's analysis of this engagement was particularly illuminating. He personally examined 5 of the destroyed Panthers, documenting penetration locations, angles, and internal damage patterns. His report, submitted to Guderian's headquarters on November 28, 1944, confirmed the worst fears of German armored leadership. The American 76mm gun, when firing HVAP ammunition, consistently penetrates Panther frontal armor at combat ranges between 700 and 1,000 meters. Penetrations are clean, with minimal deflection and substantial retained energy after penetration. Internal damage patterns indicate that penetrating rounds retain sufficient energy to ignite ammunition and fuel and to cause catastrophic destruction of internal components. Most significantly, American gunners are now deliberately targeting the Panther's frontal armor rather than seeking flank shots, indicating their confidence in their penetration capabilities. This represents a fundamental shift in battlefield dynamics. The technical advantage that has compensated for American numerical superiority has effectively been neutralized. The implications extended far beyond tactical considerations. Germany's entire strategic approach on the Western Front had assumed that qualitative superiority would allow effective defense despite overwhelming Allied numerical advantages. The Panther and Tiger tanks were central to this strategy, each capable of engaging multiple American tanks while remaining largely invulnerable from the front. With this qualitative edge now effectively neutralized, the mathematical reality of the Western Front became inescapable. The Americans were producing approximately 10 Sherman tanks for every Panther Germany built. American tank losses could be replaced within days or weeks. German losses were increasingly permanent as production facilities came under Allied bombing and resources grew scarcer. The German response to this crisis was simultaneously technically impressive and strategically futile. Design bureaus worked frantically to develop improved armor compositions, better ammunition, and enhanced fire control systems. Production priorities shifted to emphasize the latest Panther variants with improved frontal armor, but these efforts faced insurmountable constraints. Germany's industrial capacity was shrinking daily under Allied bombing. Critical resources like tungsten, chromium, and molybdenum, required for advanced armor and ammunition, were increasingly unavailable. Fuel shortages limited training for new tank crews. The sophisticated optics that had given German tanks a significant advantage in accuracy required precision manufacturing capabilities that were being systematically destroyed. Most tellingly, the German response focused on regaining technical superiority rather than adapting to the new reality of near parity. Rather than developing tactics that could succeed with tanks that were merely equal rather than superior to their opponents, German planning continued to assume a qualitative advantage that no longer existed. Major Brenner recognized this fundamental disconnect during a staff meeting in early December 1944. The discussion centered on the upcoming Ardennes Offensive, with armored officers reviewing the planned Panzer deployments and expected engagement scenarios. "Our planning still assumes we hold a decisive technical advantage," Brenner observed quietly. "We're approaching this as if American tanks cannot penetrate our frontal armor, as if our Panthers and Tigers can engage multiple Shermans sequentially without significant risk. Colonel Erich von Kielmann-Segg, the operations officer for the meeting, bristled visibly. The Führer has personally assured us that new production Panthers incorporate improved armor composition that will resist American guns. Our qualitative advantage will be maintained. With respect, Herr Oberst, our technical analysis indicates otherwise. The latest recovered HVAP rounds show improved penetrator design. American technical development isn't standing still while we improve our armor, and regardless of marginal improvements, the fundamental equation has changed. We cannot count on frontal invulnerability as the basis for our tactical approach. The exchange illustrated a widening gap between technical reality and strategic planning. German leadership continued to base operational plans on assumptions of technical superiority that battlefield evidence increasingly contradicted. This cognitive dissonance between what intelligence analysis clearly showed and what leadership continued to believe would prove catastrophic during the Ardennes Offensive. The offensive, launched on December 16, 1944, represented Germany's last significant armoured operation on the Western Front. The plan depended heavily on panzer formations, breaking through American lines and driving rapidly toward Antwerp, splitting Allied forces and capturing critical supply depots. The operation achieved initial tactical surprise, with German forces advancing significantly against unprepared American units. But as fighting intensified, the new reality of armoured combat became increasingly apparent. American 76mm equipped Shermans engaged German Panthers directly, achieving frontal penetrations at standard combat ranges. The 2nd SS Panzer Division, spearheading the northern thrust of the offensive, lost 27 Panthers to frontal penetrations during the first 5 days of the offensive, losses that previous doctrine had deemed virtually impossible. These weren't isolated technical failures or lucky shots. They represented systematic penetration of armor previously considered impervious to American guns. Captain Michael Whitman, a highly decorated Panther commander with 119 tank kills to his credit, described the psychological impact in a report dated December 22, 1944. "My gunner no longer engages with confidence. Where previously we would maintain position, knowing our frontal armor would protect us while we methodically engaged multiple targets, now we constantly seek cover between shots. This hesitation is proving fatal in combat." American tankers, by contrast, demonstrate increasing aggression. They engage our Panthers directly, maneuvering to firing positions with confidence that would have been suicidal months earlier. Their awareness of their new penetration capability has transformed their tactical approach, while our crews struggle to adapt to newfound vulnerability. The Ardennes Offensive ultimately failed, with German forces pushed back to their starting positions by early January 1945. While many factors contributed to this failure: fuel shortages, Allied air superiority, overwhelming Allied numerical advantages, the neutralization of Germany's tank qualitative advantage, played a significant and underappreciated role. German tank crews no longer enjoyed the psychological edge that came from knowing their frontal armor was effectively impervious. American crews no longer approached Panthers and Tigers with the trepidation that came from technical inferiority. The battlefield equation had fundamentally changed, and with it, the tactical dynamics that had previously allowed German armoured forces to fight effectively while outnumbered. In the aftermath of the offensive's failure, Colonel Sternbach prepared a comprehensive analysis of Panther losses, examining every recoverable knocked-out tank to document penetration patterns, ammunition types, and engagement ranges. The results confirmed what frontline commanders had already understood: the American 76mm gun with HVAP ammunition had effectively neutralized the Panther's primary advantage. Out of 87 examined Panthers, 42 had been knocked out by frontal penetrations from American 76mm guns at ranges between 600 and 1,100 meters. The penetration locations were not lucky shots at weak points or join seams. They were direct hits to the main glacis plate, precisely where German doctrine had deemed the tank invulnerable to American guns. The remaining Panthers had been destroyed through various means: flank shots, air attacks, artillery, mechanical breakdowns, abandoned due to fuel exhaustion. But the proportion destroyed through frontal penetration represented a fundamental shift from earlier periods when such losses were virtually unknown. Sternbach's report, submitted to Guderian's headquarters on January 17, 1945, concluded with a stark assessment. The qualitative advantage that has allowed German armoured forces to fight effectively while outnumbered has been effectively neutralised. American tanks can now penetrate our most advanced armour frontally at standard combat ranges. The mathematical reality of numerical inferiority, previously offset by technical superiority, now dictates battlefield outcomes with increasing certainty. The human cost of this shift was measured not just in destroyed tanks but in experienced crews lost irretrievably. Germany could replace neither the tanks nor the men who operated them. Each Panther knocked out by frontal penetration represented not just material loss, but the loss of irreplaceable human expertise, tank commanders, gunners, drivers with years of combat experience who could not be replicated through training programs increasingly shortened by wartime exigencies. Major Brenner experienced this reality personally in February 1945, when his Panzer battalion, formerly 31 tanks strong, was reduced to just 7 operational vehicles. The lost tanks were irreplaceable. The lost crew's men he had trained, led, and fought alongside for years were gone. The remaining crews were increasingly composed of hastily trained replacements, some with less than a month in a tank before entering combat. "We once mocked American tanks," Brenner observed to Sternbach during a chance meeting near Cologne in March 1945. "We called them Tommy Cookers and Ronsons. We considered them technically inferior in every respect, and perhaps they were, measured tank against tank in isolation. But they evolved. They improved. And most importantly, they kept coming, wave after wave, while our technically superior tanks burned just as easily when hit." The story of how American 76mm HVAP ammunition neutralized the Panther's frontal armor advantage represents a crucial but often overlooked aspect of armored warfare on the Western Front. It demonstrates how technological advantage in warfare is never static. It exists in a dynamic relationship between opposing forces, each adapting to the other's capabilities. The German approach to tank design pursued theoretical perfection, the ideal balance of firepower, protection, and mobility, regardless of production complexity or maintenance challenges. The Panther and Tiger were engineering marvels, representing the pinnacle of tank design by 1943-44 standards. But they were also complex, difficult to maintain, and produced in numbers insufficient to achieve strategic impact. The American approach, by contrast, emphasized standardization, reliability, and incremental improvement. The Sherman was never the best tank in any single category. Its armor was adequate rather than superior. Its gun was sufficient rather than dominant. Its mobility was acceptable rather than exceptional. But it was produced in overwhelming numbers, easily maintained in the field, and critically, capable of continuous improvement through relatively simple modifications. The development of the 76mm gun and HVAP ammunition exemplified this approach. Rather than designing an entirely new tank when the 75mm gun proved inadequate against Panther frontal armor, American engineers simply developed a better gun that could be mounted on the existing Sherman chassis, then improved the ammunition to enhance penetration capabilities. This seemingly minor technical advancement, tungsten carbide penetrators in a saboted casing, fundamentally altered the dynamics of armored warfare on the Western Front. It neutralized the Panther's primary advantage precisely when German forces could least afford to lose it. The psychological impact on both German and American tank crews proved as significant as the physical penetration capabilities. In the final analysis, the story of German tankers who mocked Sherman reliability only to face the devastating reality of 76mm HVAP penetrating Panther frontal armor illustrates a fundamental truth about industrial warfare. Adaptability often matters more than perfection. The Sherman, constantly evolved and massively produced, ultimately proved more strategically effective than the technically superior but irreplaceable Panther. As one anonymous German Panther commander reportedly observed in the war's final months, The greatest tank isn't the one with the thickest armor or most powerful gun. It's the one that shows up to the battlefield in sufficient numbers, with adequate capabilities, at the decisive moment. By that measure, the Sherman, not the Panther, was the war's greatest tank. The legacy of this technological shift extends beyond World War II. Modern armored doctrine recognizes that qualitative superiority alone cannot compensate for significant numerical disadvantage. The balance between quality and quantity, between technical sophistication and production simplicity, remains a central consideration in weapons development today. As Major Brenner stood beside his last operational Panther in April 1945, watching American columns of Sherman tanks advancing relentlessly across the Rhine, he reflected on the journey from confidence to catastrophe. "We began this war believing in our technical superiority as an article of faith," he later wrote. "We ended it understanding that no technical advantage remains permanent, that adaptation matters more than perfection, and that a good enough tank produced in thousands will always defeat an excellent tank produced in hundreds." The final statistical analysis prepared by Colonel Sternbach in the war's closing weeks told the mathematical story in stark terms. American industry had produced approximately 49,234 Sherman tanks of all variants. Germany had produced approximately 6,000 Panthers. The production ratio exceeded 8-1. American losses could be replaced within days. German losses were increasingly permanent. But beyond the raw numbers lay the psychological impact of technological evolution. German tankers, who had once mocked American tanks as inferior, came to fear the distinctive silhouette of the 76mm equipped Sherman. American tankers, who had once approached Panthers with trepidation, began engaging them with growing confidence. The battlefield equation had fundamentally changed through what seemed, on paper, like a modest technical improvement. The tungsten-core penetrator that could defeat Panther frontal armor represented more than just improved ammunition. It symbolized the American approach to industrial warfare, practical, adaptable, focused on solutions rather than perfection. This approach, multiplied across thousands of tanks, millions of rounds, and countless engagements, ultimately proved decisive on the Western Front. As the war ended, with Germany's vaunted Panzer forces reduced to scattered, fuel-starved remnants, the lesson became clear to those who had lived it. Technical superiority matters in warfare, but it exists in a dynamic relationship with production capacity, adaptability, and psychological impact. The Panther may have been the better tank in isolation, but the Sherman proved the more effective weapon system in the context of industrial war. The American tankers, who had once been mocked for their inferior equipment, had the last laugh. Their supposedly unreliable Shermans kept running when Panthers broke down. Their inadequate 76mm guns with innovative ammunition penetrated armor previously deemed impervious. Their death trap tanks ultimately drove across Germany, while Panthers burned. The technical gap that German tankers had once considered insurmountable had been closed not through revolutionary breakthrough, but through practical, incremental improvement matched with overwhelming production. In the end, the story of German tankers confronting the reality of 76mm HVAP, penetrating Panther frontal armor, represents more than just a technical footnote in military history. It illustrates a fundamental truth about modern warfare. Adaptation often matters more than initial advantage, and no technical superiority remains permanent when facing a determined, resourceful opponent with the industrial capacity to evolve and improve. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.